All right. Well, good evening, everybody. We are going to go ahead and get started. I'd like to welcome everybody to
tonight's
tonight.
program, Retirement Making Your Money Last. Uh, my name is Beth. I'm the adult programming librarian here for the Mid-Continent Public Libraries. Uh, and we have a hybrid program this evening. So we have a few housekeeping items because we've got folks online as well as here in the room with us at East Independence. Uh, So for those of you online, we will ask you to type your questions into chat. We'll save time at the end to go over questions and I'll read them so that everybody online and in the room can hear. For those of you in the room, we'll ask you to hold your questions to the end and we'll be repeating them so that everybody online can hear as well. For those of you here in the room, you've got a yellow sheet. That is the program survey for tonight's program. So we always like to hear how we did. And if you have any suggestions for topics that you'd like to see programs on in the future, we'd always like to hear those as well. Uh, for those of you online, I'm going to drop the link to the survey into chat. And I will also email it out after the program. Those of you here in the room, you've got a packet with the handouts. For those of you who are attending online, I sent an email out with the Zoom link and that had the handout attached to it as well. But finally, before we get started, I did want to mention a couple of upcoming programs. The first one I want to mention is an in-person only program. It's called Follow Your Dreams, the Bessie Coleman Story. And so in celebration of Black History Month, we will have Sandra Campbell performing her award-winning one-woman show that showcases the life of Bessie Coleman from growing up poor in rural Texas all the way to France, where she earned her pilot's license. That is
Yeah.
out February 7th at our Parkville branch, February 17th at our Withers branch, and February 24th at 6:30 here at East Independence. I also wanted to mention Shoot for the Moon, which is a hybrid program. So on February 11th at 6:30, it'll be online as well as at our South Independence branch, so off of Nolan Road. But astronomer Joe Wright will be joining us, and he will be looking back at the Apollo missions and then also talking about what lays ahead with the Artemis program that is currently underway with NASA to return to the moon and where they are in that whole process. So he is always a good time. And then the final program I want to mention is on February 10th at 6:30. This is online only. We're going to be joined by art historian Janet Mendel to tell us all about the life and times of sculptor Augustus Savage. She was a luminary of the Harlem Renaissance and is well known for her work as an arts educator as well as a sculptor. And I will send out that information to everybody following the program.
With the link to the survey.
So with that, I want to turn it over to our presenter this evening, Blaine Ross, and let him get started.
Okay. Everybody in the room good? Online good? We'll get started. All right, we'll get started today. And so welcome for everybody who's in the room and welcome to everybody who's virtual here. A little bit different for me. I'm typically more in-person room, so I'll kind of just focus my attention to people in the room here. But as mentioned, questions that do come up, we'll wait to the very end and then we'll kind of answer those. I will say throughout this, please type those questions down, write those in there as far as what it looks like. I want this to be as interactive as possible, even though for those who are virtual, as we go through this today. So we'll make it work. All right, so quick introductions for myself. So financial advisor with Edward Jones. I have an office here in Lee Summit. Been a financial advisor for 8 years, going on 9 years as far as the tenure here. Prior to being a financial advisor, I was a corporate trainer for a number of years. NEIC, so National Association of Insurance Commissioners. I worked there for 2.5 years. Community America, I was there for almost 9 years at Community America Credit Union, worked at the corporate office out in Lenexa. The big reason I shifted from kind of being behind the scenes on the corporate training side to being back on the front lines, as I call it, on the financial advising pieces of it, was about 2016, 2015, I guess it was. Father had a stroke. And realized there were some things that were not in order that I thought would have been in order when it comes to finances. So this isn't really part of the conversation as far as what we're talking about today, but I'm a huge fan about estate planning. I do a few courses around Kansas City on the topic with a lawyer who we connect with. But for those online and those in the room, out of everything that we talk about today, just please, beneficiaries, basic information to get in place when it comes to your accounts. Power of attorneys, documents such as those natures get into place because you never know when things can happen. And it makes things a lot easier on your kids when it comes to getting things done, if you do have some of those estate items in place. So, but it could also force a child to do things completely different in their life, which is what I'm kind of doing now when it comes to financial advising to make sure people are not only good on the financial side, but also the estate side is what I want to make sure we talk about in the office day by day that I have for clients here. So that's kind of brief introduction for myself. Like I say, 8 years with Edward Jones, financial advisor. And really, I do this just to really help educate the community on two things. One, things you should do when it comes to saving and investing, and the things you should not do when it comes to savings and investing. So what I will start off with, for those who are kind of older demographic, I am not going to try to sell you on any kind of annuities today. So a lot of times you get the mailer in the mail that says, hey, come to this free lunch, come to this free dinner. A lot of times those are going to be for annuities. That's what they're talking about. I won't knock an annuity. I'll talk a little bit more about annuities, but I won't knock against them. But sometimes I feel like annuities are a little bit oversold. And the reason for that, because you hear the word guarantee is what you hear when it comes to annuities. And that's kind of something to get perked up about and be, excited about when you hear the word guarantee. But there are some things that you do lose out on when you do have those annuities, especially on those higher commission, higher length of times your money is locked in. So just want to put that out there. Hopefully bring down a little bit of stress that today isn't about trying to sell any kind of annuity or any kind of product. It's really about education. It's going to be the ultimate goal for today. So what I will start off with, and I won't go through every single piece here, you guys can see this on the screen, but the two parts I do want to just focus on when it does come to a strategy or an approach to saving or investing is really figuring out where you are today when it does come to your plan. So I can't see anybody on the virtual side. I got people here in the room, of course, but I have some people, of course, that they're just trying to get started. They're 25, 35, 45 years of age, trying to figure out what steps they should do or should not do when it comes to saving or when it comes to retirement. Then I also have some of those who are either in retirement and trying to figure out the next step, or those trying to figure out how to get their assets over to that next generation as tax efficient as possible. So really figuring out where you are today. And then the number 5 piece, which I like to focus on, which is why I do feel like a financial advisor can be very helpful, is how can I stay on track when it comes to my goals. The best analogy I've ever heard was when it comes to like having a coach, when it comes to like working out, or some type of personal trainer. Really, for the most part, not to knock a personal trainer because they do a lot, but for the most part, really what you're paying the personal trainer is for accountability. It's really what you're paying the personal trainer for. They're standing next to you saying 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 reps that maybe you wouldn't have take those extra steps, those extra reps you may not have taken without that personal trainer. It's kind of similar to what a financial advisor, I believe, does, is that we help kind of map out where you're trying to get to, but also that accountability that we do each and every year that we meet and that we talk is what the financial advisor can help out with. So as I mentioned, small details of, did we do our Roth contributions this year? Did we do a traditional IRA contributions this year? All the way to, hey, we talked about doing a power of attorney, talked about it last year. Let's get that in order when it does come to your next step for yourself. So 1 and 5, I like to focus on, but of course you can just see the other 3 that are in the middle when it comes to a process to go through. So where I start today, when it does come to the big 3 that we're talking about, it's going to be your expenses in retirement when you're trying to get there. life expectancy, and then also inflation. I will say other three that we do have here. I typically kind of throw it out to the group, but with it being hybrid, I'll kind of have more control over the course today. Expenses is one of the big things that we can control for the most part when it comes to expenses. And what I mean by this is that, of course, expenses do go up, and we can't control that because, of course, with inflation. But expenses are some things that we need to make sure that we do have a good grasp on when it does come to retirement. Because I do always tell clients that when it does come to retiring, there is always going to be that ceiling that you don't want to go over when it comes to your expenses. My job is to make sure we kind of get an idea about what that looks like. Take a look at your cash flow, look at your budget, make sure we have an understanding of what your expenses are. But we want to make sure when you hit that ceiling as far as your expenses, that we don't go over that, because I always do tell clients there's going to be those what if situations that can and will come up. And hopefully, if we've done a good amount of planning, we can plan for those what ifs. So what ifs, of course, would be what if we have an issue with the car? What if we have an issue with the house? Things of that nature that can and may come up. We try to make sure we position our portfolio to get towards that goal. But things that we can't take into consideration, of course, is going to be what if somebody passes away before that happens, or what if somebody gets sick or injured prior to those situations. We'll talk a little bit about that, but those are going to be one piece that we're talking about in that expense section. Life expectancy and then inflation. So as I mentioned already, inflation, we'll have a slide on it specifically, but I'll just put this out there at the very beginning. The cost of goods go up. I think we all, for the most part, knew that, but I think we all can for sure agree over the last 5 to 6 years, things are going up as far as expenses. Housing's going up. To buy a house is going up quite a bit. When it comes to buying a car, cars are going up in value, which is kind of odd. You're typically thinking depreciation for cars, but there's a time or two, or a year or two, I should say, that actually cars were actually appreciating in value when it came to purchasing a new car. So we've all experienced that the last 5 years when it comes to inflation. And then, of course, as I mentioned, life expectancy. What we'll go over once again, high level, plan for the unexpected, prepare for the unexpected, position the portfolio for both, and then don't forget to review. It's going to be the very last slide that we're finish out today's course on. So plan for the expected. So what I have up here, and what I typically do is kind of pause and go through a few pieces here. But once again, with it being a hybrid course, I'll change it up here a little bit for this specific slide. So when it comes to picture your retirement, I'm sure you guys have all seen these commercials, right? You see the brochures that are out there when it comes to planning your retirement. And I will say, to me, what I'll just say this for my own retirement, this is not my retirement. I will say that for sure. So what I mean by this, like I'm not a big, like I said, I went to the beach a few months ago, a year ago, I should say, I guess, and I guess a few months ago. But I'm not trying to surf. That's not like my retirement. Um, to me, picture to the right, maybe camping, I guess, or what there may be. I'm not really a big camper. My son's in Boy Scouts. I've camped enough as far as what that looks like for myself. Maybe a little bit dancing over here to the left, but to me, like I tell clients, you see the brochures about retirement, people on the boats and people skydiving and bungee jumping and all that. And the reason I bring this up and spend a little extra time on this is just to share that, a lot of times what you're here is that in order for me to retire, I have to have $1 million to retire, right? That's kind of the magic number sometimes people throw out there. And the reason they throw out that magic number is one, it's kind of an easy number to remember. $1 million, 500,000, 2 million. It's kind of an easy number to remember. But a lot of times what you hear is that $1 million being that number, because if you can get about 3, 4, 5% on your money, depending on what your expenses may be, but if you can get about 3 to 4% on your money every single year, you can live off about 40,000 of that. So 3% or 4% of a million is 40,000. That way, that keeps a very healthy withdrawal rate and allows you to be able to live off your assets without having to completely deplete the assets overall. So that's why sometimes you may hear that number thrown out there. But what a lot of the clients that I work with, and maybe you all would agree as well, a lot of clients, their goal isn't trying to make sure they preserve their money towards the very end. And what I mean by that, to be more specifically, is that, hey, if I have $1 million portfolio and they're saying that I can't take any more than 4% off my portfolio, which is 4% is $40,000 once again a year. What about whatever that money's left over? Like, what do I do with that? Like, well, that goes to your kids. I don't want that to go to my kids, right? Like, I want to spend everything I have as far as the dollar amounts. And so I try to make sure when we have those conversations with clients, and they say, well, I don't know if I have enough to retire. I don't know if I have enough. We're running scenarios that show, okay, what are your expenses? What kind of travel do you have going on? What does healthcare look like? We're actually going through those numbers to make sure you have an idea about what that looks like. And if that number towards the very end of that number is too high, let's make some tweaks now to make sure it's not as high as you want it to be towards the very end. So I put that out there just to say, I do have clients that they just want to sit at home and knit. They just want to sit at home and they want to just sew. They want to just sit at home, sit at home, whatever that looks like. Have some clients that want to go to Italy. Have some people that are just happy to go to Olive Garden, right? And so their spectrum of retirement looks completely different. I think they put this out here. I don't know. Does anybody have any answers? What? Okay, I can't ask questions. Sorry, not interactive. I won't try to be as interactive. But they put these out there, I think, because it looks nice, it feels good. But like I said, this doesn't have to be your retirement. Like I said, it's what you want it to be, and especially depends on what you can afford it to be as well. My ultimate goal is I tell clients, like I say, it may not be that you're going to Italy every single year. It may not be that you're going to X, Y, and Z every single year. But a lot of times, just having the autonomy to do what you want to at any moment in time means a lot more than me working another 4 or 5 years just so I can save up a little X amount of money, right? There's that grace, right? I don't want you retiring at 55 when you should be retiring at 65, but there is going to be some of that grace I want to make sure people do have when it comes to that retirement discovery that you're on. It's hard not to ask questions on this. I'm gonna try to. All right. All right. So how much will it cost, right? So this is the big question when it does come to retirement. How much will it cost? Once again, the answer is always going to be it depends, right? So as I mentioned at the very beginning, so the way we like to kind of think about the expenses is kind of breaking it into three different buckets here. I didn't make the slide. I kind of wish this was buckets, not just a box that's shown up here. So I don't make the slides just so you guys know. But over here to the left where it says necessary expenses in gray. So your necessary expenses are of course going to be as it says necessary. Your gas, your electric. I would still put cell phone as necessary, but some of those necessary expenses that you just can't do without. So that's going to be in this specific bucket. It's going to be listed out that, hey, when we're coming up to the bare bones just to keep the household moving, what do we need to make sure that we have every single year? For some clients, it's 36,000, it's 24,000, it's $48,000 as far as what they need for necessary. And then from that bucket, what you want to think as is that second bucket, which is here in the middle, which is discretionary expenses for that second bucket. So discretionary, as it says here, we are kind of familiar with this is things that you want, but you don't really need when it comes to discretionary expenses. So things that I do when we're building out that plan for clients so that you can build out a plan for yourself is going to be those extras such as those what ifs. So examples of what ifs are going to be travel when it does come to discretionary expenses. So for some people, that's non-negotiable, right? When it comes to travel, and I get that, but really that should be in discretionary bucket when it does come to travel. Other things I think about for discretionary that some people don't always think about is a vehicle in retirement. So a lot of times, a person retires at 60, 65, or 70, and they may say, "Hey, I'm going to ride I'm going to ride the car until the wheels fall off." I guess is what I've heard. There's another analogy I heard recently. I can't remember what the other one was, but basically they're going to ride that car until they can't ride in that car any longer. I still put that, and I still recommend for you to put that even in the discretionary bucket for yourself. The reason I say this is because you may have a plan, but God may have a different plan for you. And so we have snowstorms here in Kansas City. We have ice storms here in Kansas City. We have bad drivers in Kansas. Well, that's more in Kansas. I don't know. More in Kansas side. But with that being said, you never know what may take place. And so it's just important that you kind of think about those what ifs. That if I do need a car at some point, that hey, it's not that freak out moment. I don't know what I'm going to do now, right? And as I mentioned at the very beginning, vehicles have gotten more expensive than what they were before. So what would have been maybe easier for you to purchase a little $15,000, $20,000 car just to kind of get around, they may be harder to find. Or if you already find them, they're higher mileage than what they were before. And so, like I tell clients, just those little what if situations you always want to make sure you're thinking about when it does come to discretionary expenses. The last one I'll throw in here, there's so many more, but the other discretionary expense I'd like to throw in there, it's going to be just like home repairs. So for those who do have a home, they pay the home off. You're kind of shocked by how much your house payment doesn't go down that much because a lot's still going to taxes and there's still lots going to personal property taxes. But what I do want to just talk about when it does come discretionary is things will have to be done around the house at some point, right? So if it's carpet, if it's painting, if it's wood rot, if it's new windows, things of that nature will come up during your home ownership. So we also want to make sure we have a bucket of savings just set aside for what that could look like. So in that moment in time when you get the wood rot, you get the whatever goes on with the house, that you have a discretionary bucket that you can pull from that you've been saving for, as opposed to having to feel that cringe as you were drawing $15,000 or $20,000 out of your portfolio to move forward. So Those are your two main boxes, as I mentioned, when it comes to what will it cost. Necessary expenses, as I mentioned before, discretionary expenses. I'll talk about healthcare later because that's going to be one of the biggest expenses that you're going to have in this journey. But the last one I'll talk about is everybody's favorite topic is taxes, right? And so no CPA, no tax preparer or anything of that nature, but taxes is going to be one of those situations that you will not be able to avoid when it does come to retirement at all. You can't avoid it when you're working, and you will not avoid it when you retire, and then you don't avoid it when you pass away. So like they get you on all sides when it comes to taxes. The only part I'll talk about from the very high level part for taxes, and we have a slide here about it, but I'll just say this out loud. What's working against us when it does come to retirement, as I mentioned, is going to be inflation. It's going to be one big thing, and we'll talk about this a little bit later. And then also taxes are working against us when it does come to our accounts. So I'll just say this high level here is that, most people on the virtual, most people in the room, you probably have access to a 401k, an IRA, 403b, a TSP, 41A. So I was going to ask a question, so I'm not going to throw it out there. So I'll just say it. So that's it. So I'll stop there. So a lot of people have at least option to one of those. And so whenever that goes on, you kind of made a deal with the IRS, is what you did whenever it came to that type of account that you opened up or that your employer offered. So what I mean by this is that they basically say that if you give me X amount of money every single year, you can deduct that from your taxes, right? So we made a handshake agreement that said, hey, if I give you $5,000, you can write off that $5,000 from your taxes. But now that it's time to retire and you want to take the money out, they're going to say you have to pay up when it comes to the taxes, is how that works. So if you were going to take out $5,000 for whatever reason, a portion of that has to go to taxes when it does come to your money coming back out, right? So if you were thinking, hey, I'm going to get 5,000, 5,000, 5,000, you can, but once again, a portion of that needs to be paid in taxes. So you may only walk away with $4,500 or $4,200 is what you may come off with when it comes to your withdrawal. So think about that. And that's the one thing you want to make sure you do project when it does come to your plan, is what taxes will look like when you're in retirement. So the other two things on a bigger scale is where will the money come from? So this gets asked from time to time when it comes to, okay, Brian, I'm retired now. What do I do? How does this work? And how do I get the money in my hands here? So over there to the right, we have the yellow box where it says outside income. And then over to the left, you have savings and investments. So examples of outside income, of course, are going to be pensions. Pensions aren't as available as they once were. There are still quite a few organizations that do offer it, but they're not as available as they used to be at different companies. But one option for outside income, of course, would be pensions. So it's a guaranteed payment coming to you as long as the company's in business. They'll give you X amount of money based on your years of service. Other outside income sources are going to be Social Security. Of course, there'll be other outside income sources. I know the conversation does come up from time to time, is will Social Security be there when I retire? I personally have no idea what it's going to look like when you do retire as far as Social Security. For those that are 60 and older, I mean, Social Security for sure would kind of look very similar to where we are today. So just to throw out there for those who aren't aware, but 62, of course, is the earliest that you can take Social Security. Typically 66 or 67 is your full retirement age, FRA. You may hear as the acronym, and then 70 is going to be the latest that you can take Social Security. The only thing I could just maybe guess what it may be is that either one or two things may happen. Later on, they may push up the age, and instead of 62 being the earliest, they may push it up a little bit. So maybe 63, 64 may be the earliest. And they may limit the amount that you do receive. But whenever I do planning, we got to go with what we know now, which that Social Security would be there. And so I do make sure we project out Social Security as part of your outside income. Other sources, depending on what you've done throughout your life and maybe what you've inherited, other outside income, of course, would be if you have a farm, if you have a business, you have rental income. Those are other examples of outside income. So for the most of us, savings and investments is what's going to get us there, right? And so this goes back to, we have a slide that talks about this, but this comes back to what we can control and what we can do when it does come to saving and investments. So I'll start kind of the bare bones, and then we'll talk bigger picture here. But I'm always bare minimum. If you have a job, make sure that you're adding money to your 401k, your TSP, whatever it's going to be, on a paycheck by paycheck basis. So if it's 3%, if it's 4%, if it's 5%, if it's 6%, making sure that you put that in there, especially making sure you're getting a company match is going to be the biggest piece to make sure that you're doing starting anytime, doesn't matter, just making sure you're at least doing a minimum for the company match. The other little life hack that's out there now has been out there for probably a number of years. But going there, they do allow you a lot of the different plans that you can do like a 1% increase or 2% increase or a 3% increase every single year is what you can do for your contributions. So if you're not doing that, highly recommend to do that. So I've done that at my previous jobs. I've done it here at Edward Jones. And I actually forgot about it. I set mine up when I first got here, and I realized when I kind of checked it, what, 2 years ago, like it had been increasing, increasing, increasing. I'm like glad I did that. So you typically don't miss it when it comes to that 3% go from 3 to 4 to 5 to 6. So I just highly encourage making sure you don't leave any money on the table when it comes to your savings. And then of course, investments, making sure you're picking the right investments for yourself. So two things, and this doesn't happen as often because of the 401k plans have changed over the number of years here, but it used to be that time for every once in a while, I should just say that basically a person would come in and said, "Hey, I've been adding to my 401k for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years." You take a look at this statement, and they've been in cash the last 10 to 15 years. They've been in the money market for the last 10 to 15 years. So I always do encourage clients, even if you don't even sure exactly what you're looking at, just take a look at your 401k at least every 2, 3 years, if anything, minimum. Because your ultimate goal is making sure is that it's just not sitting in a cash account. Because when it comes to that accumulation phase, which is basically from whenever you start working to we actually retire, that accumulation phase is very critical, and your investment selection is going to be very important too. That we're not too conservative, and of course, about as conservative as you can be is just have your money sitting in cash when it does come to your investments. So we'll talk just very high level about investment choices, but just want to make sure, at least as we get started, saving, make sure you do your company match when it comes to savings, and then making sure for the other piece, your investment selections are adequate. So this piece, when it comes to the income gap, this comes up from time to time as far as conversations. Most people don't care too much about the withdrawal rate. I will say that. But we do have a slide, so we will talk about it. So when it comes to the withdrawal rate, this here just says for a person who decides to retire at the age of 60 and then all the way to 80 plus, this gives you about a max amount that you should withdraw from your portfolio. So as I mentioned at the very beginning, the numbers thrown out there being, $1 million is what you need to save. And if you save $1 million, then if you did a conservative 4% in your 60s, that's about the max you should take out when it does come to your retirement. As you get in your 70s, you get in your 80s, you can see the number goes up higher and higher as it goes up. So to me, as I mentioned before, this is like a good starting point when it comes to it. But this is the nuance that I mentioned before about, how much do you want to leave? How much do you want to spend? There's a lot more to just, hey, I'm going to put a flat 4% rate out there. That should be enough. I'm not going to change it. Let's not have a discussion, because things can and should change depending on what you save and, of course, what you're trying to do in retirement yourself. The other word you may hear thrown out there, if you ever Google or just have conversation with anybody or listen to different shows, is reliance rate. So this to me is a little bit, withdrawal rate is important, but I do also think about the reliance rate as being up there as well. So the reliance rate is basically saying how much are you reliant on your portfolio. So just for easy math for myself is, if you're trying to have $5,000 come in on a month-to-month basis, once again, you want to have 5,000 coming in. If you have, for an example, no pension or you have no Social Security, if you're completely reliant on your portfolio for that money, that's just showing that basically you're 100% reliant on your portfolio in that situation, right? All your money is coming from your investments. And if you can imagine that, depending on how much you have saved. But basically what I'm trying to get at is that if you have a lot of fluctuation in your portfolio and you're highly reliant on that portfolio, you can imagine how that could kind of be uneasy when the market goes down. Does anybody remember 2020? Anybody there? Everybody remember that part? So two things to remember, at least for me, more just two things, I should say, but two things I'll put out there, I should say, because it's a very crazy time period. But one, of course, was what took place back in March of 2020. So if everybody remembers looking at their 401k or their statements in that point in time. The market pulled back about 30%. It's what the market pulled back in just 1 month is what it did. So if you can imagine if you were retired, or let's just say you retired in January, let's just say make up that January of 2020. You're feeling good in January, you're feeling good in February. And then of course, March took place, your portfolio went down 30%, but your portfolio went down, and you're 100% reliant on that portfolio. You're still going to get that money, but you're going to look at it a little bit different, when it comes to that monthly pool, when it comes to that portfolio being down for you. So that's why we always make sure that, we do have a few different ways to make it work. Of course, your Social Security, your pension, and then if at all possible, not to be as reliant as much on your portfolio. I'll talk about it now and I'll talk about it again. One way, as I do recommend clients to kind of position the portfolio, is making sure that you do have a little bit of a buffer between the market and your expenses. And one way to have that buffer, of course, is to have like CDs or have money market money to kind of give you a little bit of a margin, or give you a little bit of a cushion between yourself and the market. I have some clients, depending on how conservative they want to be or how leery about the market or concerned about the market they are. We have something that's as short as a 1 year cushion. So once again, if you have, let's just say your expenses for that year are going to be 32,000, or is it going to be 20,000, whatever it's going to be. We have that amount just kind of sitting in a money market or a CD ladder. It's another way to look at that. So that way, if the market does go down, you have that cushion that you can pull from instead of pulling from the market. I have some clients that go up to 3 years. So depending on where they want to be when it does come to their cushion, 1 to 3 years is where you can be. When you start getting over that amount, I will kind of have a little extra conversation to see if there needs to be a change, because returns do matter, especially when it comes to retirement. So I don't want us to get too conservative, but I also want to make sure you're able to sleep at night, as well. This here, I won't go through this like a paragraph scenario that I'll give you, that it wants me to give you. I'm just going to talk about it, just kind of not to bore you guys with the details here. But basically, the conversation in this one is going to be, we have the Tom and Julie, who basically what they want to do is they want to retire before 65 is what they want to do. So the example, once again, 162, 161, they want to retire at 62. What does that look like, or what should you be thinking about when it comes to a person who wants to retire early? And even though I use the word early, that definition is very broad. Whenever you want to retire is whenever you want to retire. But you just want to retire when you can retire. It's the only thing I'm going to add to the conversation. So a big picture, if you guys can see here, Tom and Julie's income gap. So the expenses are going to be 65,000 for the expenses. Their Social Security is going to be 20,000 for Social Security. So of course, if you do the 65 minus the 20, you get the 45,000 being the income gap for the individual. So when it comes to the next piece here, so 6% withdrawal strategy. When it comes to the next piece here, possible trade-offs is reduce the spending goals. So if you do have a person, or if you're looking at yourself to retire, maybe prior to maybe what you should on paper retire, changes you, of course, you're going to want to do is reduce your spending goals. I will put a little bit of asterisk, if I could, on that piece when it comes to reduce spending goals. I will say there's only so much reducing of your spending that you can do, right? And so what I mean to be very blatant about this is that expenses are expenses, right? And so there's only so much you can go down. Let's just throw out a number, for example. Like if you're going to say, hey, I want to retire early, instead of me spending $75,000 a year, which is my salary, I'm going to try to go down and living off of $24,000 a year as far as my income. It's not really going to work. It can work, but it's not going to be what you think it's going to be when it does come to retirement. So I just really try to make sure I encourage clients to really think about what that looks like to have those kind of expenses. The best way I've come up with to help clients kind of position the conversation around spending goals is just really think about, what are you spending now as far as your expenses. It may go down. A lot of times you realize that it goes up actually in some situations, but I will say that whatever you're looking at as spending now, that's really kind of a good base to kind of base what you're maybe spending in the future when it comes to everything else. Your income, of course, would drop, but your spending doesn't drastically change after retirement. So other option that you can do, of course, is delay retirement. That's typically everybody's worst option that they want to pick, is delay retirement. But I will say one of the easiest things to do, of course, to keep that retirement goal intact at the very end, is to delay retirement, especially for those who want to retire before 65. If you don't have that healthcare option to pick from, delaying retirement is going to be the best way to help save your expenses if you can wait to 65 to get the healthcare options. Last two here, of course, is to work part-time. I used to not be a big fan of working part-time for clients or suggesting to work part-time. But to me, working part-time, of course, can be of course, a financial gain, but it could also just be a social gain when it does come to working part-time. So a lot of times, you're kind of wrapped up in your own idea of what working is, and your identity is working. So a lot of people who do retire, they're trying to figure out what do they do next when it comes to leaving their job. And so working part-time could be maybe a nice little transition from full-time to part-time to maybe fully being retired as far as your work time options. So last part, it just says up there, flexibility is key, which I would agree. Things will shift during retirement. I do always tell folks when it does come to retirement, at some point, a 2008 will happen. So 2008 basically was a 52% drawback is what took place in 2008. So 50%. And I do mean that. If you look at statements, I do have the opportunity when I first started off looking at them. If you had $100,000 in your portfolio, by the end of that year, you had $48,000 is what you had in your portfolio. So was that a good feeling, if you can imagine? Or if you had $1 million, of course, it went down to $500,000. So another thing that's going to happen 2020, like I mentioned, the market pulled back almost 30% when it pulled back in just 1 month. So I just always tell clients something like that will happen during your retirement. So we just want to make sure we're prepared, and we're kind of talking about those what if scenarios. This piece here is a busy screen. I would have done it a little bit different maybe, but so on this one here, the only part I want to just kind of see in that right-hand corner is where it says incorporate versus insure. What I'll talk about just on this screen, I think there's a few more slides that talk a little more in depth, but I'll just kind of use this screen as a jumping off point. But the next few slides really talk about when it comes to these various options or various scenarios that can come up. Do you want to incorporate that in your plan, or do you want to insure against that? So the example I like to throw out there at the very beginning of this is going to be there may be at some point that you don't really need car insurance. There may be at some point that you don't really need homeowners insurance. But a lot of us are saying, I don't want to take on that risk, right? And so what I mean by this is like, let's just say, for example, you've been a really good saver and you've saved up $15,000 is what you've saved up, or you saved up $20,000 in your savings account. So if I need a new car, I'll just go and buy my own car. That's what I'll do. But a lot of us still, of course, insure against that because, yeah, it may cover the vehicle itself, but what if somebody gets hurt? What if something else goes on? What if something goes on? So we do insure against that by having car insurance. Same thing with homeowners insurance. Let's just say, for example, you've saved up $200,000, and if my house burns down, I can write a check for $200,000, right? But most of us still have insurance because we don't want to write a $200,000 check to build our house again, right? So we're paying insurance, which means we're insured against any kind of risk that may take place. So it has up in here, inflation, healthcare, living longer than expected, long-term care. Those are things that you can either once again incorporate into your plan. Do you want to pay for it yourself? Or then once again, do you want to insure against it when it does come to these other items that are being listed on this screen? So Helen, once again, I won't go through the story here. I'll spare you guys on that part. I'll just get to the point of what it is. So in this situation, what we have for Helen is that basically she's looking to retire about the normal age. So she's looking to retire 65, 67, 70, depending on what the person wants to do. But really her main concern is about healthcare, what her main concern is. So within this story, it basically says that she's taking care of her aging mom, and she wants to make sure what can I do to prevent that as far as the financial portion of that. So when it does come to those kind of questions is what should I be thinking about? Because once again, I'm going through this with a loved one that I'm taking care of course, is manage your spending. So of course, what that means is just live a little bit less than maybe what you need, build up a savings a little bit to the side when it comes to your spending needs. For those that are on the virtual side and for those in the room, huge fan of a health savings account, HSA, so health savings account. There are FSAs as well, flexible spending accounts. I think there's other names for it too, but I'm a huge fan of a health savings account. So if you guys didn't have a chance to take advantage of it during open enrollment, try to see about doing it this fall for open enrollment. But that could be a huge benefit when it does come to healthcare costs that you can take advantage of. I don't think there is a slide about this, but just as a reminder for health savings accounts for those who are not familiar with it, what's nice about it is that you can put the money into it. It's tax deductible when it does come to the money you put into it. It grows tax-free, which means you don't have to get taxed on the growth on a month-to-month or a year-by-year basis. And then if you use it for healthcare cost as well, you don't have to pay any kind of taxes on the money if you do distribute the money from the account. I would love it if they had a retirement account that was like that. You can put money to it, get the deduction, let it grow as well, and then take the money out and not pay taxes. I doubt they would ever come up with that because they're losing a lot of revenue. IRS would, but health savings accounts are a nice way to take advantage of the healthcare conversation. But the budget for Medicare / healthcare insurance include health expenses in your budget. Consider supplement health insurance and then consider long-term care or life insurance. So one of the pieces for that very last bullet point, long-term care. As I mentioned, my dad had issues as far as his health. He's still alive, of course. I just want to put that out there. But long-term care, the benefit of long-term care, and I'll talk about this in maybe just kind of two ways, not to go too far down the rabbit hole, but for long-term care, it can be a very nice crutch or a very nice bridge when it does come to your health care. To be very specific or be very I'll be very specific when it comes to long-term care. It will be if you can't do activities. So they say 2 of the 6 daily living activities. For example, if you can't bathe yourself for whatever reason, you can't get yourself out of the bed, things like that, you are qualified to go on your long-term care policy. Um, what I will say, if anybody's ever done any kind of research, feel free after this, you guys can Google this. Those locations are not cheap for anybody who's ever put a loved one or taken a loved one to one of the communities that are out there, somewhere between 2, 3, 4, all the way up to $15,000, $18,000 a month. That's what some of these places can be when it does come to care. And so this goes back to that conversation between, do you want to insure against that or do you want to just incorporate that in your plan? Right. And so to incorporate that in your plan is what you want to do is act as if you had an $18,000 a month expense. And if you had an $18,000 a month expense for 3 years, could your portfolio handle that? Or could your money handle that large withdrawal over a 3-year time period is what you're trying to figure out. There may be some people who say, yep, I could pay $18,000 a month, have no issue. Then at that point, if you wanted to, you're going to incorporate that in your plan. For some people, they say, no, I don't want to do that. And so that's why like a long-term care insurance policy can be purchased. So that way that if that expense does come up, you have a bucket of money that can be utilized to pay for your long-term care. You may run out, but at least you had some bucket of money that you could pull from before you had to touch your own money is what that would look like. Um, some people don't like the long-term care insurance policies. And I will say this, typically most people don't like them just because if you can pay into it for 10, 15, 20 years and you can pass away. And if that takes place, then you didn't get to use the long-term care policy at all, right? So that's why some people, they don't like the long-term care. They say, I'll just self-insure than having me pay for a policy that I may never use is what they're going to do. Some of the newer policies, they do allow you to have like a cash refund or a death benefit is what some of the policies do allow you to have. But I do try to educate, communicate, whatever you want to say as far as this next piece. But we do that with like all insurance though, don't we? I mean, we paid on home insurance for 30, 40, 50 years, right? And then 2 things happen. Either one, you never used it through that whole 30 or 40-year time period, or you do use it and then you somehow your insurance policy gets jacked up. And then, or some people I heard they get kicked off their insurance because they did one policy, even though they paid it for the last 30 or 40 years. Same thing with car insurance. You can pay car insurance for the last 20 or 30 years, right? You may never use it, but it is what it is. So I just try to tell clients, I know looks like an expense is what it looks like right now. But it can be a huge, huge win on the other side if and when you guys do need long-term care insurance or um, disability insurance. That could be another way to think about it too. So um, I want to ask questions, but I'll keep going. I'll go through it. This piece here, position the portfolio is going to be the other part here. So the last few pieces I'll go back to outside of the planning pieces of it. It's just going to be back to the investment conversation. So there are going to be time to time that I do have people come in or they're having conversations and they say, hey, now that I'm retired, I want to get crazy amount of conservative. And what I mean by crazy amount of conservativeness on your portfolio is I want to go all to cash, or I want to go all to treasuries, or I want to go to all the CDs as far as what the move's going to be. I'm being a little dramatic, but what people do forget from time to time is that not only do we have to get you to retirement, of course, that you guys may have heard, but it's also making sure that we get you through retirement. And so, yes, you may retire at 55, 65, or 75, but depending on when you retire, we may have another 25, 35 years, so we got to get you through retirement. So if we become too conservative, I already mentioned what's working against us, of course. Taxes are working against us, and inflation is working against us. So once again, just to throw it out there, inflation is typically about 3% as far as inflation. It's got quite a bit higher over the last 3 to 5 years, but inflation means cost of goods go up. And of course, as I mentioned, for taxes. So if you think about it, put the numbers here together. If we're losing about 15% to federal for taxes, we're losing somewhere between 4 to 5% for state for taxes. That's about 20% that we're losing when it comes to our withdrawals from our portfolio, depending on how much what tax bracket you're in, but somewhere between 10 to 15, 10 to 20%. And then you think about that, inflation every single year is going up by 3%. Inflation is 3%, inflation is 3%, inflation is 3%. If we're only getting 0.25, if we're only getting 1% on our money every single year, we're quickly falling behind when it does come to the growth that you could be receiving if we did invest the money in a more growth oriented way. So this sometimes in conversation comes up about dividend paying stocks, dividend paying mutual funds sometimes comes up as a conversation at this point. There are ways you can position your portfolio to say, hey, you don't have to be crazy aggressive. We're not talking Bitcoin. We're not talking marijuana stock. We're not talking with some other aggressive things. I'll call it aggressive. It's because we're in the moment right now, like gold or silver. You guys may be hearing about that a lot right now, but we got to make sure once again, even though we move from the accumulation phase, the distribution phase is still really, really important that we make sure that we keep that growth moving forward, keep our foot on the gas is how I like to say it here. So the quick and easy way that you guys hear from any kind of course you've ever been through, any kind of conversation you've ever had with anybody, of course, is going to be equities, which is basically stocks, is what that means. So basically, you have some type of ownership. Excuse me. You basically have some type of ownership in a company. You have voting rights depending on what kind of equities that you do purchase. I'll just throw this out there from a high level from words you guys may have heard or see out there often. Stocks, of course, is going to be individual stocks with a company. Mutual funds, there's going to be another word that you hear. You probably seen in your 401ks, mutual funds, and then ETFs or exchange traded funds. So there's a lot more out there, but those examples are kind of your three broad topics when you think about equities within your portfolio. And then over to the right where you see where it says fixed income. So that specific part is going to be like CDs, treasuries, corporate bonds, municipal bonds, different things of that nature. So typically fixed income are going to have some start and some end when it comes to the structure of that product. But like I said, treasuries, corporate bonds, CDs, municipal bonds, all those fit within that fixed income bucket. The last thing I will say about these two buckets here, does anybody remember 2022? If you look at your portfolio, your equities were down in 2022 and your fixed income bucket was down in 2022 as well. What was unique about that is because typically everybody says, hey, the older that you get, you go more into bonds, right? When you hear about the story when it comes to the equities versus fixed income. What was unique about 2022 specifically is that when the stock market was going down in 2022, the fixed income bucket was going down as well as far as the valuations on fixed income. So we kind of had a double whammy as far as 2022. And one of the bigger reasons that the fixed income bucket did not do as well is because interest rates were going up. So if you remember, at least I know I did, mortgage rates were in 2, 3, 4% for mortgage rates is what they were in. Anybody who did any kind of house shopping in the last 2 years or so, mortgages were in the 7, 8, 9%. What mortgages were. Car rates went up. What else? Credit card rates went up as far as the rates. So as rates went up, that did really depress the valuations for fixed income, which means the value of the bonds went down. So 2022 was not a sexy year as far as the market, but we got through it, just like we'll get through the other ones that come up. So the last part I'll just say when it does come to everything we're talking about as of now is just reviewing what you have in place. So I think for the most part, this slide is going to be more talking about your investments and your plan, which is what I do want to make sure I do preface. So, your plan is not one of those things that you just want to set it and forget it when it does come to your plan or even your investments at all. But I do tell folks that, your investments in something you want to go in there and kind of play with every single day. Markets go up, markets go down. That's just what the nature of the market is. But it is something you do want to review when it comes to your investments. Your plan itself, that's going to be a moving target when it does come to your plan. Typically, as you get older, the little one-offs won't come up as much as they used to come up with when it comes to the one-offs, I should say. But I do want to be clear that it is something you want to make sure from the plan that you review and make sure there's any tweaks that need to be done. Life changes is what I mean when I do say that. Somebody may have passed away, you may have inherited something, somebody may have an issue that you may have to pay for. So those things do change. Those things will come up when it does come to your plan that you want to make sure that you're reviewing. And so I'll kind of end this when it comes to this section to where I began at the very beginning. Review also means your estate plans, which you also want to make sure that you review. So beneficiaries is one thing you want to review at least once a year, once every other year, as far as your beneficiaries. Power of attorneys, as I mentioned, make sure you review that as far as your power of attorneys. Because like I say, things do change, and it's just important that you make those changes in the moment, because once you're not able to either mentally make that change or physically because you're no longer here, those adjustments can't be made after the fact. So I always do tell clients I'm working with, the investment portion is going to be a very important piece that we take a look at. The plan, of course, is very important, but we got to make sure we wrap this all up when it comes to a good, solid estate plan when it does come to the next phase that can and will come up. So I think I would say taxes and death is one thing you'll never get away from. And so we got to make sure that we're planning for both of those moving forward. So can I say questions now?
Yeah.
Okay, I feel good. All right, I'm typically just gonna drive all the way through here, so it's a little different. But if you can give me a question or two, I'd love to answer. Love to answer it.
You've got for employer retirement accounts, can you explain the benefit of Roth versus non-Roth 401k contributions?
I don't think I have a slide for it, so I'll just talk from this one. Okay, so big picture, you have your traditional IRA, that's what you have, and then you have your 401k. So kind of just put those into two different columns. So one column, I'll just say you have traditional IRA, and then you have your 401k. In another column, you have a Roth, ROTH. You have a Roth 401k, and you have a Roth IRA. So a lot of different ways to think about this, but just kind of put that line in the middle. You have two columns is what you have. So what they call on the 401k that you have through your company or your traditional IRA, when you make a contribution into that investment, you get a deduction on your taxes. So kind of hard to talk to the person without seeing their eyes and see if they're getting or not getting it, but I'll make it work. So you have your traditional IRA, your 401k, you make a contribution. As I mentioned, you make an agreement with the IRS that says, hey, I'm going to take the deduction in the year that I make my contributions. But then on the flip side, whenever you do decide to take the money out, you would then pay taxes on that money whenever you do decide to take the money out of the IRA or your traditional 401k. On the Roth side, ROTH side, whenever you make your contributions into the Roth, either if it's a Roth 401k or just a Roth IRA, you're not getting the tax deduction. But when you do take the money out, you don't pay taxes on the money when you do decide to take the money out. To answer the question a little bit further, just for the person who's there, just for anybody who's listening for this portion of it, there is a conversation between the investment diversification, which is the investment that you're selecting, but there's also a conversation that needs to be done about tax diversification. And so what I do recommend is to have both if you can. So have a portion of your money going to the traditional 401k and have a portion of it going to your Roth 401k is what I recommend in these circumstances. That way, whenever you're starting to do the distribution in retirement, you can pull from either bucket depending on where your tax situation is in that moment. So hopefully that answers the question on that one.
The next question was, aren't Roth IRAs non-taxable? And
I think I answered that one then. Yeah.
And then someone else asked, when do you recommend converting to a 401k rollover account to a Roth?
That's going to be, it depends on that one. So when do you move money from a 401k over to your Roth? This is going to be a tax question. So please say, don't say Brian said this. So you won't work with your tax person. But really the best time to do it is going to be when your income is lower. So for the most part, perfect world, if I could do this in a perfect world, if you were to retire at 59 and a half. So the reason I say 59 and a half, because a lot of times you could start doing deductions from your 401ks, your TSPs at 59 and a half. I always joke around. IRS is the only organization who cares about half birthdays, but it has to be 59 and a half. If you do it a month before, you will get a penalty if you take it out before. So if the perfect world, if you were to retire at 59 and a half, and then you weren't going to take your Social Security until 70, your income now dropped, right? And so now you're making less than what you made before because you're no longer working. Then at that point, you can start doing any kind of conversions and moving money from a 401k over to a Roth for that next, what was that, 9 years, I guess, take 9.5 years. You can move that money over to a Roth is what you could do in that time period. So like I say, perfect world, you would do it just when your income is lesser than what you were made than when you were working. The asterisk, as I say this, you got to make sure that you do it correctly because two things can happen. If you have that, you're taking out too much, it puts you in another tax bracket. And another thing is that if you're doing too much, you can also mess up your Medicare, which means you have higher premiums in Medicare is what you have as well. So that's why I say it's kind of a little nuanced, but perfect world, 59 to 70, it's kind of that sweet spot that you want to do it.
And we've got one other question related to the Roths versus traditional. Someone asked if there are taxes in traditional IRAs, but not Roth IRAs. Why do people use traditional IRAs?
So for the most part, so traditional IRAs came out first. I don't remember what year the Roth came out. You can probably Google or Chat GPT that one, but traditional IRAs have always been around. Most companies use 401ks, traditional 401ks. Roth 401ks have just more recently come out, probably last maybe 5 or 10 years. Roth 401ks are now available within their plans. But there are also going to be income limits. So depending on how much a couple makes or how much an individual makes, you're no longer able to put into a Roth is what you can no longer do. So some people, depending on their income, they can no longer put money into a Roth IRA because they make too much. So they just have to do a traditional. But for the most part, there's kind of two rules of thoughts on this one. But for the most part, the Roth IRA is very beneficial for two reasons. One, as I mentioned, you could take the money out tax-free when it does come to the money that you do have. And then what's nice about the Roth IRA as well is that if and when you do pass away and you still have money in the Roth IRA, it's a tax-free transfer over to the other um, generation. So just to say that part really clearly on that piece of it. So let's just say if I have a Roth IRA, I pass away and it goes to my daughter. With a Roth IRA, she assumes or she now owns that Roth IRA and that money gets given to her in a tax-free manner is how that works. On the flip side, this wasn't exactly the question, but just to be clear, on the flip side, if I had all my money in a 401k or if I had all my money in a traditional IRA and that money was then given over to my daughter, that money, she would have to pay taxes on that money. So the IRS basically says, I don't care who pays taxes on this money, somebody's paying taxes on this money. So, but I prefer Roth, but there are some reasons why you can't do a traditional or do a Roth, I should say.
Uh, and then someone asks, are you a fee-based financial advisor or a percentage-based?
We have both options. So I would say fee and percentage to me mean the same thing. So I would say we have both options. I'll just stop there. We have both options, what I'll say. So
Well, that's all the questions I see. I did put the link to the survey in the chat again, and I will send out an email to everyone with the handout. Oh, someone just put in another question. So last question here. You said make contribution tax-free for Roth IRAs. Did you say we do pay taxes for contributing to a traditional IRA?
let me make sure. So if you make a contribution into a traditional IRA, it's tax deductible. If you make a contribution into a Roth IRA, it is not tax deductible. Does that answer the question? Does that sound?
I think so.
Okay.
So basically, you're gonna pay taxes. It's just a question of whether you pay it before.
Correct. Yeah. So easy math. This isn't dollar for dollar, but if you put in 5,000, you can deduct 5,000. And then if with Roth IRA, you can put money into it, but you don't deduct it. That's kind of how that works.
All right. Well,
Hope that
thank you,
answered.
everybody, for coming, and thank you, Brian.
Yeah.
Very informative presentation. Lots of great information and things to think about, and we hope to see everybody in another program. Have a great evening.